So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview. So today we have four presenters, myself, David, and Khalif, and Jamie. Jamie's our communications director, and she'll be monitoring the chat and helping us out with technical behind the scenes. So for those of you who don't know, Anza-Borrego Foundation is an organization that is 59 years old. It started in 1967 supporting the state park to buy land to transfer to the state. When Anza-Borrego Desert State Park was created, it actually had 70,000 acres of inholdings within the boundary of the park. And we were asked by the Parks Commission to support them in purchasing and transferring those parcels to make the park whole. Since then, we have become a more robust organization, and in 2003, we became an official cooperating partner with a contract with the state of California to run education programs, run the retail locations, and also we are an official fiscal agent to the park. So we're able to raise money and raise grant funds and collaborate with them to get more work done, sort of breaking free of some of the bureaucracy of the state. We're so proud of what we do, and we are really excited about the impact that we're able to make through our programming and really making new advocates for the desert. Seems to me that the desert is at more risk than ever before, as we face climate change and looking for new ways to bring renewable energy, clean air, having access to parks and safe places to recreate. The desert parks are really, I think, misunderstood. And our work is to bring light to these areas to have people understand that they are incredibly important to the ecosystem of California and contribute as a climate action in what we're striving for to meet renewable energy goals. So today we are pleased to present to you the Renewable Energy Threats Part 2. There is a Part 1 on our website. I encourage you all to watch that one as well. The main difference to this one is that we have a lot more detail about a specific threat, which we'll be going through. So my name is Bree Fordham. I'm the executive director of the foundation. We have David Garman here, who is the president of Tub Canyon and also the Borrego Valley Endowment Fund, among other things. And we have Khalif Assagai, who is our lobbyist and strategist, have been working with the foundation for 3 years, and excited to dig into some of the work that we've been doing around policy in that way too. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get going into our slideshow. Okay. So our presenters today, which we've gone over, and a little bit more about us, our focus on land conservation, education, and park support, a nice map of the park there, with some highlights of our recent transactions. And just a reminder of what makes this place so special. I think many of you watching this video, and I know everyone in the room today already knows this, but the reason why we do the work that we do is because this place is profoundly special. At 650,000 acres, it is the largest state park in the system. It accounts towards 85% of the total designated wilderness in California. It is an international dark sky park where you can see the Milky Way with the naked eye. It has more than 1,500 species of flora and fauna, including endangered species like the bighorn peninsular sheep. It is a living classroom for archaeology, paleontology, geology, and is the most biodiverse place, arguably in the United States, and only one of a handful in the world that should be protected, being contiguous of 650,000 acres. It is a profoundly special ecosystem in how we think about what should be protected and what contributes to our climate. So I'm going to hand it over to David Garman. And David, feel free to introduce yourself a bit and dive in.
Great. Thanks, Bree. Yeah, the only thing that you left out of the introduction is also president of the Desert Protective Trust, which is
That's right.
a political action committee that was set up a couple of years ago to be able to respond to threats like the Golden Pacific Power Link. And today I'm just going to talk about really the big picture background of how we got here and how something like the Golden Pacific Power Link got here. Starting with so for decades, investor-owned utilities, which I'm going to refer to as IOUs, had a pretty simple business model. They generated electricity and they sold it to their customers. Transmission and distribution of electricity was part of the cost of doing business, but the big bucks for the IOUs was in generation. But that all changed, and that's why the title here is Disruptive Technology Forces IOUs to Pivot, because that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about. In the late 90s and early 2000s, when solar panels came along, suddenly IOUs no longer had a monopoly on the generation of electricity. Suddenly, their customers could generate electricity. And that was a problem. And there was a serious talk of a death spiral for IOUs. You know, as more customers adopted solar panels and generated their own electricity, that meant that the IOUs would have to charge higher rates to their remaining customers just to maintain their revenues. And that action only served to make rooftop solar even more attractive from a cost standpoint. So, rooftop solar really was a game changer that disrupted the old business model that had generated steady profits for decades. And so, this is just an example, a quintessential example of disruptive technology. Um, next slide. Next slide, please. And so, as you'll see, the initial response from the IOUs was not particularly nuanced. We will support rooftop solar just as soon as we can find a way to charge for the sun's rays. Um, Unfortunately, they didn't stop with that. Next slide. The more thoughtful response eventually came from the Edison Electric Institute, which is the trade association for IOUs. And during the winter of 2012, the trade association noted that distributed generation, which is another way of describing rooftop solar, um, had the prospect of creating, quote, declining retail sales and earnings. It had the prospect of creating declining financing of major investments, the prospect of creating potential obsolescence of existing business and regulatory models, and the possibility of creating adverse impacts for utility investors. Now, the strategies that emerged from this observation were essentially twofold. Number one, do everything to impede the development of distributed generation or rooftop solar. And number two, pivot away from the soon to be obsolete business model of electricity generation to a new business model based on the transmission of electricity. That's the big switch. Next slide, please. So this pivot that the IOUs did created two divergent but not mutually exclusive pathways for powering our homes and businesses. The pictures on the left, which is the preferred method of the IOUs, is remote generation of electricity and the construction of massive and expensive transmission lines for which the IOUs receive a federally guaranteed rate of return in the range of 10 to 11%, which most people consider to be a pretty good return if you can get it. On the right is an image of rooftop solar, which for our purposes, again, we're calling distributed in-basin generation. It's distributed because in this model, solar panels would be on every roof and over every parking lot, and in-basin because the electricity is generated where it's used. Distributed in-basin generation does not require the construction of massive transmission lines. It's not vulnerable to transmission lines going down. It creates vastly more good-paying jobs, and it's less expensive for ratepayers. But of course, this model of distributed in-basin generation would be devastating to the bottom line of the IOUs. Next slide. The IOUs across the country have been absolutely masterful in pushing their agenda of remote industrial scale generation and the associated construction of transmission lines. And these days, it's difficult to listen to the news without hearing once again of the desperate need to build more transmission lines. And they've pushed this agenda at three levels. And Bree and Khalif are going to talk about what's happening at the legislative level here in California. But here I'll just mention that the capture of regulatory agencies by industry is no secret in this country. And the Sunrise Power Link, which was a predecessor of the line that we're talking about today, is an object lesson on that subject of regulatory capture. And on the level of media and public opinion, our local IOU spends millions of dollars each year supporting sympathetic politicians and supporting good causes across the county, including Borrego Springs. Next slide. Um, so this slide I included just to say that some of the largest corporations in the country are pushing this remote industrial scale generation agenda, and I'm sure that you see some familiar names here. Next slide. So with that background, now we have to add climate change. Senate Bill 100 that passed in California in 2019 mandates that California have 100% renewable energy by 2045. And we are fortunate to live in a state that believes in science and is committed to doing what it can to address climate change. But there's a problem. And the problem is the valid sense of urgency around climate change is creating a sense that we no longer have the luxury of thinking deeply and thoroughly about how we're going to achieve our goal of 100% renewable energy. The line pushed by the IOUs is that we have to cut corners if we're going to save ourselves. Business as usual won't work. And so we need to do things like weaken CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. And we need to do things like override all of the conservation efforts like California's 30 by 30 goals. Next slide. And the question is, well, how are those policies playing out in California? And the answer is, if you're an investor-owned utility, it's playing out pretty well. The local parent of the IOU in San Diego had record profits in 2023, as did our local IOU, SDG&E, approaching $1 billion. And that's while a quarter of his customers are more than $400 behind in their electricity bills. These policies have effectively strangled the installation of rooftop solar in San Diego. The IOUs have captured the regulatory agencies, the California Energy Commission, the California Independent System Operator, and the California Public Utility Committee. And the success of these policies has really resulted in unprecedented threats to California's open spaces, whether they're protected or not. And that's really why we're here today and what we're talking about. Next slide. There are multiple organizations that are looking at the potential of rooftop solar, and they come to very different conclusions than our IOUs and their consultants. In fact, the regional decarbonization framework that our county has put together to get on board with combating climate change has numerous errors in it, but they are errors that really support the IOU's agenda of the remote generation with the building of massive transmission lines. And the problem with the regional decarbonization framework as it stands now is this bias and the errors which occur in it. For example, here, in part of the report, they identify more than 61,000 acres that would be available for solar installations, which would generate more than 20,000 megawatts of electricity. And yet, in the report, they only use a number of 3,300 megawatts of electricity. Next slide. There are a number of other organizations that are looking at this question of how much solar energy can be generated. Back in 2014, the Luskin Center at UCLA came to the conclusion that rooftop solar, parking lot solar in the LA basin would generate much more electricity than was being proposed at that time by something called the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. A recent analysis by our friends at Protect Our Community Foundation just in 2024 found a similar conclusion for San Diego, that there was more than ample rooftop and parking lot solar that could be built out that would meet our needs, not just now, but going forward. And if anybody wants to check this out, there's something on Google called Project Sunroof. And you can put in any area to see what the potential is for electricity generation. Next slide. I just put this in. This is just another example of putting the thumb on the scale in our regional decarbonization framework that the County of San Diego has put together. When they're trying to do a cost analysis, what's going to cost more? A remote industrial scale generation or distributed in-basin generation? You have to add up the numbers of the costs for each one. Uh, Interestingly enough, when they were calculating the cost of remote industrial scale generation, they forgot to include $3.9 billion that the transmission line would cost to get the energy from Imperial County and San Diego County back to the coast. Next slide. So the problem for Borrego is that the county's regional decarbonization framework identifies Borrego Springs, which is that unincorporated part of the county in the middle of the Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, as the county's lowest cost area for the development of solar and wind farms. And so in the map on the left, that 70 square miles in the cross-hatched area in the upper right-hand corner of the map is Borrego Springs. That is the unincorporated, privately owned part of Borrego Springs as contrasted with the park. And as you can see, it is covered with solar farms. That is the intention. So Bree and Khalif are going to explain that if the Golden Pacific Power Link is allowed to go through the park, the industrialization of Borrego Springs is really a foregone conclusion because it's essentially part of the plan. Next slide. Want to leave you just with this quote. This is from Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., who was one of the early champions of the creation of the Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. Uh, I'll give you a moment to read it, but certain areas have a distinctive and subtle charm, in part because they are dependent on the spaciousness and solitude and escape from the evidence of human control and manipulation of the earth, a charm that is constantly growing in value as the rest of the earth becomes more completely dominated by man's activities. The quality is very vulnerable, and nowhere else are casual, thoughtless human changes in the landscape so irreparable, and nowhere else is it so important to control and completely protect wide areas, which I think is a great encapsulation of the some of the values that we're trying to protect here. Thank you, Bree. That's my last slide.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you sort of setting the stage for the conversation. I want to hand it over to Khalif. Khalif, will you take a moment to introduce yourself, talk about your work and what you've been doing with Anza-Borrego, and then dive into some of the details?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Khalif Ostagai. I'm a policy strategist, and I've been working with the Anza-Borrego Foundation since 2024, I think. And I came to this work because I'm a huge fan of the park. It's a place that I discovered when I first got to San Diego, but really started visiting a lot in 2023 during the super bloom. And I went back every weekend for probably months. I think all of you know the feeling of the Brigo creep, and I just started to creep on me. And I became very committed to visiting the park and then to protecting the park. And so I was happy to meet Bree and hear about the challenges that the park was facing and have the opportunity to step up and say, I know I can help. And so as we move on to the next slide, I'll say that, over the time that I've been working with Anza-Borrego, the first engagement came as a result of a bill that was trying to basically streamline CEQA to fast track a transmission line through the park. Now, I'm not going to read the details of each of these bills, but I'll just give you an overview of what they all do. And it's very simple. Each one is 3238 and 951. Were both intended to basically streamline or exempt transmission projects from CEQA. And both of these bills were sponsored by San Diego Gas and Electric. And San Diego Gas and Electric has been very honest with the legislative staffers in the Capitol in saying that they have some major projects that they want to accomplish, but that there's one thing standing in their way, which is this state park. Happens to be our state park, Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. And so in both of these years, 3238 was in 2024 and 951 was in 2025. And both of these years, SDG&E said that there's no particular project that they're concerned about. They just want to do this for the general benefit of all Californians and all IOUs, which we always knew was not true. And as they pushed these processes, we would ask them, what project or what is your goal? And they would say, we don't have a line. The line that we're currently talking about, Golden Pacific Power Link, was at that time owned by Horizon West and was not a line that SDG&E had any control over. But obviously, during the same time that they were saying they had no control, they were trying to acquire rights to the line, which they ultimately acquired. And so for 2 years, they pushed legislation that would have made it easier to build through the park. And that was their specific goal. While they tried to act like there was something else going on, these bills were all about CEQA and Anza-Borrego Desert State Park and pushing a line straight through the park and not having the same type of pushback and fight that they faced with the Sunrise Power Link, which was ultimately routed around the park. AB 550, the Petrie-Norris bill, basically changed the standard for taking taking an endangered species or a threatened species when building a renewable transmission project or renewable energy project. And this goes back to what Mr. Garvin was saying earlier, in that the legislators' approach now, backed by the IOUs, is that, hey, we have to sacrifice something. And as we move towards addressing climate change, which is a critical issue, we have to reduce our protections in other areas because ultimately these areas won't exist or we won't be able to benefit from them if climate change, continues to accelerate at the rate that it does. So we need to remove other protections, and this bill's right along with that. And then the same thing with SB 1097 Wiener, which actually we wanted it to be a good bill. This bill had to do with streamlining CEQA for reconductoring. And reconductoring is basically looking at an existing transmission line and adding new lines to it that are higher capacity lines. So they can take a line that is 200 kV and make it 500 kV potentially by simply adding lines. And in our view, that's a good idea in a lot of places because it reduces the need for reduces the need for cutting out new rights of way in protected spaces. And that should be something that is pursued. But from ABF's perspective, that's something that should be pursued along a majorly disturbed corridor, such as where the Sunrise Power Link currently exists. It's much better to upgrade those lines than it would be to build a new line that would come through our park. But this was another bill that was sponsored by an IOU supported organization whose stated goal is to address climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and fast track the creation of renewable energy transmission. But again, this is something that would have allowed them to take our 69 kV line that comes to the park that's fairly noticeable and potentially upgrade that to a 200 or 200 kV or greater line. And so all of these bills taken together represent the legislature's most recent efforts to circumvent environmental protections to fast track lines through protected areas. Now, as the Anza-Borrego Foundation, we have become a trusted and key partner to specific committees within the California legislature. One is the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, and the second is the Senate Energy and Utilities Committee. And this came through our work in 2024 when we engaged the legislature and said, "Hey, this CEQA bill would be really bad for our Anza-Borrego Desert State Park." We met with the chair of the committee at that time, who was Benjamin Allen, who visits the park and who has been visiting the park since he was a kid. And we were able to build a strong relationship with Bryn Cook, who is a consultant for the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. After our first year engaging, first we won that fight. Without us, I don't think it would have been won. Senator Allen had a raucous and almost disturbing hearing on AB 3238 because the author was pushing so hard and trying to basically ignore all of the senator's amendment suggestions. And the senator held the line and forced a compromise that would have made the bill better for us on 3238. And then ultimately that bill died at the next step because it was too complicated to get together in the time that was remaining in the rest of the year. AB 951 Zabur, that also died as a result of our efforts. There was really no other opposition. And so we were organized about that. We showed up to the committee hearings. We testified in opposition. We talked to the consultants in natural resources. And ultimately, that bill died in appropriations as well. The Petrie-Norris bill has been significantly amended and it continues to move, but it's no longer a threat, the threat that it was initially. And then SB 1097 this year also died in appropriations, but that came after some really adept maneuvering on our part. So when the bill was introduced, we were contacted by the consultant saying, "Hey, Anza-Borrego, this bill seems like it would be a big problem for you. We need a lot of information for you so that we can craft amendments to protect the park." Now, I want to say this again. In 2024, we were introducing ourselves to the legislature. In 2026, the key consultant on a bill that would have impacted our park called us to say, "I need information so that I can help to protect your park." That's a world of difference in the course of 2 years. And additionally, we had direct contact with the chair, Senator Ben Allen, who was the chair of the Senate Senate Energy and Utilities Committee in the Senate as well. And we reached out to him. We had some, conversations offline, and he pushed in his committee for this bill to take some major amendments. In the first committee, we were able to get specifically Anza-Borrego Desert State Park exempted. So I want to say that again. In the first committee, we had amendments that would have protected our park specifically. No other park in California, just us, because they used our 69 kV line as a test case to ensure that a CEQA exemption would not be applied to a line that has never had a CEQA analysis done in the past. That would have completely exempted our 69 kV line. And again, this was a proactive amendment from the committee based on information they got from us, based on the relationship building we've been doing over the last 2 years, and the effectiveness of our advocacy strategy, and the basic excellent case study that this is, that the park is for this issue. And then in the next committee, we got State Parks Foundation involved and a few other organizations involved. And in that committee, there were additional amendments to the bill that would have strengthened it from our perspective. It would never removed our opposition. But the chair was in communication with us the entire time about what we're working with. Would it work? Ultimately, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but the bill went on to die in appropriations anyways. Now, the reason I want to emphasize the kind of arc here is that the work that we're doing around this issue is actually stopping legislation that would have streamlined these processes. And this fight that we currently have against the Golden Pacific Power Link, we simply would not be able to wage had any of these bills passed, specifically 32, 38, and 951. They would have circumvented CEQA. There would have been a compressed review period, and we would not be able to fight it in the same way that we did um, the Sunrise Power Link. And so now we have a fight ahead of us at the PUC. And the reality is, we've won there before. But here's the difference. Now we have champions from the legislature, like Senator Ben Allen, who are going to be engaging on our behalf to say, we are against this line. I am against this line as a senator, and I want you to protect Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. We now have more champions in the legislature than we ever have before. We've had more victories in the legislature than we've ever had before. And the work that we're doing really matters. But it still must continue because though we've had these victories and though this particular line is subject to CEQA, the SDG&E, as they've tried everything in the past to circumvent this process, and as David discussed over these years, what they've tried to do with energy transmission and taking control over the lines and making renewable energy about major solar facilities and transmission lines, they're not going to just give up now. There's a big chance that they can come back in the next year and try again with a bill that would specifically benefit the Golden Pacific Power Link line, right? And so we have to stay agile, we have to stay engaged, and we have to understand that if it's not them, it might be somebody else. But we don't anticipate them accepting the existing timeline because they've worked for 3 years to try and accelerate that timeline. And so when we start getting pushback, and when they start seeing our pushback, when the application's in, they can come back and continue to push for changes in statute that would accelerate the Golden Pacific Power Link line. So we have been incredibly successful at stopping these major threats to the park, specifically 3238, 951, and 1097, because those would have accelerated the building of a transmission line in the park. So as of today, the transmission line is subject to CEQA as it would have always been with no changes. But that is fragile. That could change. And that's why it's important for us to continue to stay engaged legislatively, continue to track legislation, and also to proactively seek legislation that will protect the park, which is something we'll be working with the California State Parks Foundation to do in the next legislative session.
Great. Yeah, Khalif, thank you for going over all of that. I mean, I'm so grateful for Khalif and his work. We would not be where we are today. I never knew that we would have to get so involved at the advocacy level, and I'm glad we did when we did. If 3238 would have passed, we'd be in a very different place today. I also just want to mention a bill that Khalif and I were working on yesterday. I don't have the name handy, but we are sending in an opposition letter, and this particular bill is extremely threatening in that it would circumvent CEQA and remove the public from any feedback for taking any existing farmland and turning it into solar panel projects without any intervention. It would just allow them to completely turn any farmland project into solar. And the majority of the basin of Borrego Springs, being that it's overdrafted and many of the farmlands are being followed would fall under the terms of the way that this bill is written, that they would be allowed to turn these projects into solar projects without any community feedback, without any CEQA review or impact studies. So we're in the game on that one as well, and getting our voice heard because Borrego Springs and Anza-Borrego Desert State Park seem to be really a very unique case study for the unintended consequences of some of these bills. Hey, I think if we're going to build solar panels, let's use already disturbed land. And maybe fallowed farmland is a great place to do that. But I also think that based on what you heard from David, that do we need industrial scale solar to meet these requirements? And do we need to put solar panels inside the largest, most biodiverse state park because there happens to be fallowed farmland there? We just need to be looking at these with a scalpel, not with a bulldozer. These are not, generalized concepts. Each area is needs meaningful review, and I think that the um, sweeping attempts to try to speed up renewable energy through this industrial scale infrastructure does have unintended consequences, and we have become the voice um, of that unintended consequence. And because of Khalif's work, we're the first organization that they call, and we're proud to do that. So thank you, Khalif. So next, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the specifics of the power line. Let's see here. My slideshow's not, there we go. Um, so I'm sure everyone here is already aware of the Golden Pacific Power Link if you've been following our newsletters and our website. But if you're new to this concept, we learned in 2022, 2023 that CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, had approved a line from Imperial Valley to north of San Onofre called IV to Songs at that time. And it was just a point A to point B. And they approved it as part of their transmission plan in looking at what the CEC had forecasted for need for the state of California. Um, Not too soon after that, David Garman called me and he said, "Hey, there's an approved power line project that says it'd like to go through Anza-Borrego Desert State Park." And that's really when we started to get to work. So we've known about this power line for quite some time. Um, and we just didn't know how quickly it would come together. We are now at the place that we have a proposed line, we have a contractor, and we're just about to go through the application process. I'll go into more detail on that soon. But the big picture is that we're looking at here on the screen the power line on the left, the very far left, is the 69 kV line that runs through the park that was adopted by the park. This line was built in 1927 to 1930, and it was the way that they got energy from San Diego to the Brawley area and into Borrego Springs. Um, when the park was purchased and turned into state property in 1933, this line actually divided the two sections of the park known as Anza and Borrego, and later they were merged into one in the 50s. So this was never a line that went through a CEQA review. CEQA didn't happen until 1970, and it was never a line that was intentionally put through a park. So this has been adopted by the park and is essential to the town that is within the park, which is also a very unique quality of a state park. What has been proposed three times now, once with the Southwest Power Link, once with the Sunrise Power Link, and now with the Golden Pacific, is to turn that line into a 500 kV line. So far, we've been successful in having those proposals rerouted, but what they're proposing is to basically expand the right of way of that 69 kV line to run more energy from the desert region into sort of the urban or coastal regions of California from a big global perspective. They just want to move more energy from those two locations. And Anza-Borrego Desert State Park sits right in that path. The picture on the right is what we'll see in a map later, the proposed route in the section that is absolutely the most sensitive section that we're most concerned about. What you're looking at here is Highway 78. There's a cluster of tamarisk trees there, which is our Tamarisk Grove campground. And then we have Grapevine Canyon, which runs up the valley up to Ranchita area, which this section is also not only a scenic highway, but wilderness. It is bighorn sheep lambing and travel territory. And it is also home to several Kumeyaay sacred lands, which are protected in a cultural preserve in the Grapevine Canyon. So we're hitting up all of some of the reasons why we protect this place all in one place for a power line. So I want to talk a little bit more about the 69 kV line because I think a lot of people have found that this is a very interesting intersection of allowance for discussion around why this might be acceptable. And like I said before, this line never went through a CEQA review. So it's already destroyed lands that I don't think today we would ever consider destroying. It's been there for 100 years, and much of the land has repaired. Desert soils takes 1 to 200 years to repair once you disturb it. And so um, we've seen sort of the life cycle of disturbance. Now, they still maintain these poles. They've replaced them with metal poles, but there's still no lights on them. They're not very visible. They're very low to the ground. And they still allow people to camp around them, travel on the roads next to them. Um, while less disturbing, they still are not something that are ideal to put in an environment that's protected in this way. Um, because this was established before any CEQA review, we feel that as they're trying to streamline and circumvent CEQA, we really have to be at the plate and at the table talking about how we need to be exempt from this. And actually, any other project that didn't go through CEQA review should not be streamlined because they haven't looked at it thoroughly. There are other state parks that have power lines in them. And so when we go to bat for this discussion, we're not just going to bat for our parks, for our park, but all parks. There, in fact, are about 80 other parks with power lines in them as well. Um, and we're really making sure that this discussion is elevated when we're looking at how we're going to meet renewable energy goals. So this is not just an expansion of a regular right-of-way. This would be an expansion of something that's never received formal review. So this is the proposed route. I'm sure many of you have already seen it. It's on our website and the SDG&E website. It's not very detailed. I have sat in several meetings with SDG&E along with David and looked at these in a lot more detail. We gave our opinion on this route and asked if it could go to the north or the south. And it was told to us that that just was not reasonable. So the text that I have on the right is interesting because this is the exact text from the CAISO report so that you can see what was formally submitted to CAISO for understanding the trajectory or the point A to point B intention when the project was approved by the CAISO. And you can see that Horizon West was the original company that won the bid, but SDG&E late last year did acquire this section of the project. So Horizon West is still building the substation at the end of the line called Recon. It is a separate project and application process, but they are contingent upon each other. So I've just added in SDG&E here, but you can see that there was to minimize length. That would also require that it goes through Anza-Borrego because if we add length to go around, that seems to be an issue for ratepayer cost. We also see that they would like to minimize impacts to dense urban areas and parts of the park. But what we see has actually been proposed is that they're going through scenic highway, designated wilderness, lambing territory, and culturally sensitive areas. So we feel like there's a lot of room to improve here, and we are definitely voicing our opinion about what we'd like to see, as we don't think that the proposed line is justified. So where we are in the process, I've learned more than I probably want to about how the state of California determines energy projects. But from the very beginning, this starts with the CEC. This power line was thought of, probably more than 10 years ago by a group of people thinking about what our energy use would be. That was forecasted and discussed. And in 2021, CAISO put together a document that said we need this much power from these areas, and it needs to go from point A to point B. So we are now at the place, sort of right in between the orange and the yellow arrows, where CAISO has approved it, and the contractor is going to submit the application to the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission then will accept that application, review it, and begin down the road of an environmental review, which will take about 2 years. Inside of the 2 year process, there will be two very important public response times. One is early on when they're building more public engagement, and there will be mailings and information that will go out. We will be on that mailing list, and we will let all of you know how you can participate to give direct feedback to the CPUC. And then there will be a second time in that process, also when they're further along, to give further, deeper review on that environmental review detail. Once that's completed, they will take all of that information and they will daylight a draft EIR and location of the line. And that opens up a public review, which is about 30 days. And that really is the time when you start to see bigger organizations begin to litigate and argue. For context, the Sunrise Power Link, once the EIR draft was made public, it went through 5 years of litigation, and then ultimately was determined to be rerouted. So we're looking at right now, SDG&E is going to submit an application in November. Once that application is closed, we will only be invited for public interaction with the CPUC during that time. And it will open back up for public review probably in 2028. And then we would go through whatever amount of time it would take for them to determine a route if it's fought against. So this is not something that's happening very fast, but something that we need to be paying very close attention to. And Anza-Borrego Foundation will be your hub for that information, as we will be staying very closely connected with the CPUC inside of that application process. So some things to just be aware of that we're really concerned about, which I know you already all know, but we can't emphasize enough how important this desert park is to climate action in the state of California. And we feel strongly that this should not be considered the place for a power line. You know that this place is big at 650,000 acres of contiguous parkland and is more than 3/4 wilderness. I mean, wilderness in the state of California, we do not need to be harming these ecosystems in the name of renewable energy. It encompasses the gateway community of Borrego Springs, which really depends economically on recreation and people coming to visit the park. And we're thinking about what will this do to the economic value of this small, struggling community. It has more than 1,500 species of flora and fauna, including the bighorn sheep. It is a designated national natural landmark, international dark sky, and World Biosphere Reserve. More recently, it has become a quiet conservation area, as it is one of the few places in the United States that you can experience unadulterated wilderness quiet. I think a lot of us don't probably realize that we don't hear silence anymore with the hum of a refrigerator or a power line or the ding of our phone or a car on a distant freeway. You can still experience actual quiet, wilderness quiet in Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. And this power line would go through a few of those sections that have been designated quiet to be replaced with the hum of a 500 kV line. This is also a wildlife corridor, and the proposed line comes very close to that section as it crosses between desert and mountain areas. We specifically have connected to Cuyamaca Rancho State Park to make that corridor possible. And this just further threatens and has a domino effect on all the hard work we've done to make this a place and a sanctuary for biodiversity and climate action for the state of California. So our case to the CPUC and our letter, which you can find on our website, I'll ask Jamie to put some links in the chat for you all for quick reference. Our landing page for our threats and our action toolkit and our opposition letter are all there for you to use. But just want to highlight that they're going to be up against a lot to propose this line, and we're going to make sure that all of these points are made at the CPUC level. The CPUC has already said no to this line. The Sunrise Power Link has been thoroughly reviewed by the CPUC. It has gone through the ALJ and was determined it had 52 unmitigable elements that were not seen fit to put a power line through. And we're pushing all of this information right back to the top to say, what's changed? The second point is that what's changed is that it's more fragile today. In a recent study over the last 40 years, we've seen vegetation decrease by 40% in the park. Our ecosystem in this park is more fragile and should not be further disturbed in the name of renewable energy. This route has been chosen by convenience, not least impact. In our meetings with SDG&E, they themselves admitted that they were not willing to take acts of Congress or have to go through federally owned land, and that going through state park was just easier and would allow us to get renewable energy faster. This is an issue in my eyes and also in my discussions with the CPUC. This is not criteria for the selection of the line. The selection of the line has several criteria that are contributed to it. It is not just about speed or convenience. It is about impact. It's about ratepayers. It's about the flow of the grid. So there's many factors that need to be put together, and SDG&E is not showing all those factors in this proposed line. Something that's really interesting to me and I think really important, especially when we look back at what David was talking about for the future of solar panel impacts and these larger infrastructure projects, is that currently in both the CAISO documents and SDG&E's claims, there is no guarantee that this line will carry clean energy. The CAISO document says that the intention of the line is to be able to deliver more renewable energy to the grid. And SDG&E is saying that this is really being built for reliability and resiliency so that there's less interruptions to power services. And in digging further, what I understand is that they're not actually connecting to existing green energy. They are actually building it and waiting for new green energy projects to be hooked up to it. So wherever the line gets built, the corridor will follow. A great example of this is the Sunrise Power Link. There are currently 11 solar panel projects and one very large wind turbine project at the very south end of the park that actually we received some mitigation funds for viewshed. Sunrise Power Link also has two major substations. And that's happened just over that 20-year period. These projects are not overseen by the CPUC and they're handled at the county level. And these small backcountry communities have no voice at the county level. And large 600, 800 acre solar panel projects are being put in to some of the most pristine backcountry property in San Diego County currently because of the Sunrise Power Link location. So if we have a power line running through Imperial, Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, through even the Forest Service on the other side, that's all going to become the corridor for what becomes the next group of renewable energy infrastructure projects. And so we need to be thinking about not just the line, but everything that comes with it. And if there's no guarantee, if those projects don't get built, this will just be potentially dirty energy running through a park to bring more energy to the grid. We've done some research, and I'm presenting this to the CPUC as well. The demand case is already wrong. In looking at the CEC's forecasting, they forecasted a certain amount of energy use for each time period. Year over year, since 2015, they've projected 10 to 15% more than we actually need. We've actually stayed completely flat in our use over the years. However, these projections and forecasting the need are what approve these projects while we're not actually seeing that the need is ever met. So my concern and what I'm bringing to the CPUC is that do we actually need this line based on prior history and the more rooftop solar that we're seeing, are we going to build lines that will never meet capacity in places that do not need to be destroyed? I actually had a meeting with the CPUC just last week, and I asked them this question specifically if this is an argument that they would take under consideration with the facts. And they said, yes, for sure, we would look at this. So I'm excited to hear that they would be willing to look back at the forecasting models to make sure that this line is not being built unnecessarily. This is an industrialization plan. And this is, just kind of going back to that this is not just about the line, this is a larger corridor that we're looking at. This is actually the plan. It is not just a line. It is like to build more solar panel projects. So the placement of it really needs to be thought through. And unfortunately, because the application doesn't include the projects that will come afterwards, they're only going to be doing CEQA review on the line. But I am fighting for them to be looking at if there are any projects in the queue that would like to be built in this area, that they get incorporated in that CEQA for a more programmatic EIR. But I don't know if there are any in the queue in that area. You can't destroy a climate asset to build a climate infrastructure without doing the math. And this is where there's a flaw in the CEQA process. They don't always look at doing the math at the cost of the carbon footprint of the infrastructure compared to the carbon footprint that they're saving. And that's the devil's in the details. And that's why we're going to be on the inside looking at the CEQA documents and the NEPA documents to be giving our feedback to make sure that we're asking the right questions about that equation. And lastly, this is one of the most protected natural places in the America West. And, I think California is a leader in what we do for most of the other country. And I'd love to see that California will commit to not building this line in the largest state park in the system that carries the most biodiversity as a commitment and as a model to others for how we can have renewable energy while also protecting the places that contribute to climate action. So all of this is outlined in our letter and sent to the CPUC, and we will be making sure that these points are continually made across the process. This is an interesting slide for you to kind of visualize. You can see here all of the power lines that exist in San Diego County, the blue lines. This doesn't show their voltages. This is just all power lines that exist. And if you can see my cursor here, this is Anza-Borrego Desert State Park, this center section, and this is the 69 kV line that runs through the park with the little tail that goes right into Borrego Springs. So this, as you know, is not industrialized and pretty pristine. This down here is the Sunrise Power Link that came from Imperial, and they actually went around following the highway around the very edge of the park because the park is right here. And then they went around reservation land and around some Forest Service. And so they've made some very large sort of dips and curves to preserve the park, tribal lands, and other protected conservation areas in San Diego County. So we know they're capable of doing it. This line actually, once approved, increased about $500,000, and the ratepayers did absorb that because they wanted to preserve Anza-Borrego Desert State Park. That's already filed and is in the book, so I'm hoping that they will do that again. So what we're doing to take action, like I said, we're getting involved at the CPUC level, talking to the project management staff. As Khalif reviewed, we're opposing legislation that would negatively impact the park. And that is not over. This application will not be completed for 2 years, and there's still time for new bills to be amended and passed and impact what happens when that line is built. So we have to be staying on the ball and watching that closely. will be supporting intervener funding. Now, this is a technical term, and we don't have anything official to announce at this point, but we'll be partnering in a coalition style or with a single agency to actually submit to become party to the inside of the application process. And what this means is that with the support of an attorney, we will be responding to every filing and every document that is put through this process to make sure that we have eyes on it, with experts and other witnesses, energy experts that we already have in the queue to be helping us. We have some people working pro bono for us, others that we'll need to pay. This is a massive undertaking. It'll probably be a 2 to 3 year commitment for us, but we do not see any other way that we can sit on the sidelines and watch this go by. We are putting ourselves right in to the process and making sure that Anza-Borrego Desert State Park is represented 100% all the way through. And lastly, we're educating our local assembly members, senators, and supervisors. Just earlier this week, I saw Supervisor Desmond put something on his Facebook page saying that he would not stand for this without public comment and collaboration, and we're super grateful. We also have a letter from Ben Allen and Senator Sayarto going both to the CPUC and the commissioner, not just the staff, but also the commissioners themselves. So we are gaining a lot of opposition from others and decision makers that feel similarly to us and that they do not want to see this line. Lastly, not on the slide, but just to let you know that we are in communication with the other areas that are being impacted by this line, including Pechanga, Temecula, Warner Springs, and we're going to continue to expand that conversation with others. As you know, this proposed line, it probably won't go where they say it's going to go. It might go a few other places, and those few other places also need to be a part of this conversation. So we're really trying to bring in all the organizations that don't want to see this line impact their area, depending on what the CPUC decides at the end of those 2 years. So how can you help? Stay connected. Visit our threats page, sign up for our newsletter. Jamie has put together a very specific newsletter you can sign up for. It's called our action list, and this will allow you to get a special email when we have something that we need you to act on right away. As we're inside this process and we need to maybe turn something around in less than 30 days, we want to email those people who want to be a part of that. A sign-on letter or contacting someone that you know, we may need your help. And so we want you to be on that list if you're interested in being on it. Otherwise, being on our regular e-connection and following our social media is definitely the way to go. Donating to Anza-Borrego Foundation or our sister PAC organization, Desert Protective Trusts, are also excellent ways that you can support us. We are looking at massive expenses to make sure that we have a seat at the table with the CPUC. And Desert Protective Trust can also make financial contributions in a different way than we can. So supporting both of those organizations as we sort of take a tag team approach to policy work and the work that we need to do inside of the CPUC intervener are going to be critical to what we do over the next 2 to 3 years. And last is to share your concern. Share this webinar with your friends. Share our website with your friends. Let people know that this is happening and get other people involved. We need more people and more voices to just know about what's going on and stand up for what they believe is right for the county that they live in. So that concludes the presentation section of the webinar, and I'd like to open it up to questions. And I see Jamie has put all of the links there in the chat, so feel free to open those up and take a look. Just want to say that the toolkit has a lot of information for you. We've pre-written letters, so you can take those, tweak them, and use those to send. We also have links to all of the local regional decision makers that we think need to know about this. We are also working a little bit more closely with the county in that we want to make sure that the supervisors are really aware of what rights they have in this in input for this process. So reaching out to your supervisor is incredibly helpful as well. It's not just senators and assembly members. Okay, I see a question here regarding raising awareness. Have you tried reaching out to local universities who might spread the word to a greater community? No, with that we haven't. That is a great idea because I know that students are great activists and can really gather and mobilize. So that is a great idea. And I see Jamie writing it down. So we will work on that. I think at least San Diego State, UCSD, USD, I think even UCLA, um, and then there's also smaller universities, all of the community colleges. I think that's excellent to be thinking about, um, for sure. Thank you.
I have a
Any other
brief
questions?
comment, a brief comment to make on that on reaching out to universities. In my presentation, I mentioned the skullduggery and lawsuits involved around the regional decarbonization framework. And when the students at the University of California, San Diego, became aware that a professor there who was also working for years with the Edison Electric Institute had written the county's decarbonization framework without revealing what his past affiliations were, the students were up in arms. So the students were very open to this issue, and I think that really underscores the benefit of this idea.
Yeah. All right, Diana. So Diana has had a relationship to this fight before. Diana Lindsay was a former board member and fought the Sunrise Power Link. And she's saying that there was a photographic journal that was put together and was sent to the assembly members and senators. This is a great idea. I mean, we have so many photos from our photo contest, and Paulette's photography is absolutely incredible. I think this is definitely worth doing, and I think we could actually do it fairly easily. Um, especially if it were digital, getting something out that was emotive and really shared what's at stake. I've even thought about, and I don't know that it will happen very soon, but could happen later, is to drive the entire proposed line and video what it looks like to really articulate what's going to be impacted, because I think so many people don't conceptualize what's impacted from the desert level. Khalif, this one might be directed to you. Does this undertaking include advocacy by individuals visiting local legislators or their Sacramento offices?
Yeah, so we have not engaged people visiting their local legislators, but we have, as part of our process fighting the Golden Pacific Power Link, we're asking people to write letters. But yes, we do our advocacy directly in Sacramento, but it would be helpful to have more folks engaged. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Mhm. And Diana asks, how does Desert Protective Trust differ from Desert Protective Council? Does this organization about Anza-Borrego Desert State Park or include other areas? Yeah, great question. So, um, Desert Protective Trust was developed, 2 years ago by David Garman, Dick Troy, and myself. It is not a 501c3. It is a PAC, which technically makes it allowable to make financial contributions to senators and assembly members. The contributions to this organization are not charitable. Um, this is a complementary organization built specifically to support what Anza-Borrego Foundation can't do. We made the mission broad and that we wanted to protect California deserts, as we would hope that the Desert Protective Trust could also help maybe Mojave Desert Land Trust when they were in need. Right now, the projects that are listed on the website are just this power line project and some of the solar threats that Borrego Springs and Anza-Borrego Desert State Park are facing. But that does not limit what we might work on. It's just what we're working on now. It's very focused currently just on this project. It is not affiliated with the Desert Protective Trust, which had a separate mission, did work with us, but is totally separate and not connected at all. And I don't
I
think that the
agree.
trust
I
actually
think you
exists.
meant to say not associated with the Desert Protective Council.
You're right. I'm sorry. The
Yeah.
Desert Protective Council. Yeah. DPC was their organization, I believe, is dissolved. And we did benefit from them over the years. They're incredibly supportive to a lot of the work that we did over the years. We worked with them more specifically in education and supporting our fifth grade camp over the years, but we no longer work with them and they're no longer functional.
And I just wanted to add in with respect to the Desert Protective Trust that, you know, one of the big hurdles that we face when talking about, changing policy is not just whether the policy is good, it's who is funding the politicians. And I think David mentioned in some of the slides that, the influence hasn't just been that they're introducing legislation. It's been that they are bankrolling folks' campaigns up and down the legislature. And one of the ways that we can counter that is to be in that conversation as well. Just giving, we would never be able to give as much as SDG&E or Sempra Energy or some of these larger organizations, but it makes a big difference when money is coming from constituents and money is coming from folks who have a particular interest in a project or in the district. And so by engaging DPT, that's part of how we were able to build such excellent relationships in the legislature because we were also playing the political game and making contributions as well. So as much as our work is really important, far more important than the giving is a nice complement to that that helps to counter the undue influence, or I shouldn't say undue influence, but the outsized influence of the IOUs.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, we really it's a drop in the bucket comparatively. They're able to do a lot more than we can, but it does do a lot when we um, we can contribute and have those meetings. They definitely hear us, and it works.
And I'll answer Diana's question. So, a political action committee is organized specifically for the purpose of engaging in political giving. If it were to be a charitable organization, then they would no longer be able to give directly to elected officials.
Yeah, thanks, Cleve. Any other questions for our panelists today? Okay, well, I hope that means that we were thorough and that you are walking away today with more information than you came with. Maybe a bit invigorated on what you might be able to do next. I think this is why we exist and why we do the work that we do. And um, we can't do this work without the support of our constituency. Um, the emails that we put together and the content that we put out, it's important. And we're sending messages out to you so that you can stay informed. So please stay tuned. Please share our messages with those you think will care. We will be making sure to keep tabs on this process and do everything we can to make sure that this park is protected. That is absolutely our promise to you. Um, this recording will also be posted on our website along with part one. So if you'd like to share that, that's available to you. Probably be up in a couple of days. I just want to give special thanks to David and Khalif for being here, the work that you've done with Anza-Borrego Foundation, the work that you're doing outside of the foundation to continue, this network of good to protect the lands of California. And of course, to Jamie. Jamie is the reason why we have a website and why we have emails and why we have social media. When we were fighting the Sunrise Power Link, we did not have as much of a robust communication ability. And so this is a total game changer for us. So many thanks to Jamie. The reason why we've come so far and so fast is because of what she's doing behind the scenes. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time. An hour and a half is not just a little time. So thank you for sticking it out and hearing all of this information. It's really very important. David?
I'd like to say a special thank you to Bree Fordham. This is not the first rodeo that Borrego has been to, but we have never been this far upstream in the decision-making process, which is exactly where we need to go. And it's because of your work, your effort, your leaderships, and working with Khalif that we are where we could not be better positioned for this fight.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, David. It's my pleasure. All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you next time.